What's up, you radical human? Today in the studio, I sat down with Ali Miller. She's a registered dietitian and functional nutritionist, and we went all over the show. We talked parasites, keto, glyphosate, microplastics. Is keto damaging to the metabolism? What about fasting? Should women fast? Should they not fast? What about the future of our health and our children's health and what she's doing to combat that? We dove into so many topics. Ali is very, very bright and sharp, and I think you're going to get a lot from this episode. So without further ado, let's do the thing. Ali, welcome to the show. You're visiting us from just down the road here in beautiful Wimberley, Texas on this fine day. I'm going to get right into it. What is an anti-anxiety diet?
So an anti-anxiety diet is using food as medicine to support the microbiome, to harness the HPA axis or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal feedback, that regulatory system, using food as medicine to rebound our adrenals, to replete any micronutrient deficiencies. So when we're looking at mood, we look to things like zinc and folate, for instance. And then we also look at food as medicine strategies specific to neurotransmitter imbalance. So in my book, I take 6 different, to make it sexy, 6 different R's.
Right.
We're looking at reducing inflammation, resetting the microbiome, repairing gut lining, restoring micronutrient status, rebounding the adrenals, and then finally rebalancing our neurotransmitters.
Cool. That's so cool. I love that holistic approach to this.
Yes.
It's so interesting to me because I'm with you. Food as medicine is something that I think is fundamental to this entire message and so important. But, you know, it's interesting for you to tackle this and, you know, call it an anti-anxiety diet, because I think the average person is walking around thinking, or maybe just not putting the connections together, that food has anything to do with anxiety. Just like, well, anxiety is what happens in my head. And they don't really thinking that maybe what they put in the mouths is feeding what they put in their head through the HPA and the gut and the brain connection, all of that stuff. How are you helping to just help people understand the importance of that holistic system?
Well, I think the brain-gut axis is on the rise. We're learning more and more about the influence of our gut microbiome and how that influences not just production of neurotransmitters on a favorable level, but also when we're dealing with gut dysbiosis, parasite, or yeast overgrowth, we actually produce more fight or flight, stress, anxiety driving neurotransmitters. So we make more epinephrine, for instance, or like adrenaline. So people that are dealing with panic attacks often think, you know, mental illness stays in the head, but it's so brain gut connected. And then, as you mentioned, you know, any of those other access points could be the root cause. And I think many people walk around even thinking, well, I don't have anxiety, I'm just a high stress person. And so that's a bummer with the concept of, you know, using a diagnostic term in a book title can be a little bit not as broad as it should be, because my principle of the book itself truly is that stress is the Achilles heel to wellness. And I think that if you are a high-powered attorney that isn't resting well, firing all signals, if you are a mama that is homeschooling and working your homestead, if you are, anytime we're overextending ourselves, name any of the typecasts, if we aren't grounding, if we aren't harnessing our HPA axis, and ultimately the body feels stressed and not safe, it's not going to operate appropriately. So we're going to wait and see whack-a-mole symptoms of leaky gut or hormone issues like estrogen dominance or a pregnenolone steal where we're converting progesterone to cortisol, for instance. I mean, you name it, hypothyroidism, autoimmune condition, all of this can be exacerbated when the body internally says, something's wrong, I'm not safe, I don't feel well. And I think that that's so much broader than anxiety, right? I mean, we could throw so many diagnostic codes out there that could be regulated through this approach.
And a few of the things that you just said, pretty much all of them are on the rise. The blowing up, autoimmune conditions, anxiety, depression, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. It's just like, it's going the wrong way. And there's clearly a signal in that noise that the world in which we're living in feels crazy and out of balance sometimes, and you've really got to kind of restore that holistically, not just through how you perceive the world and your connection to nature, but how you feed yourself and all of that stuff. And I'm curious about, you know, I'm going to guess that you work predominantly with women in your practice and your books, because men obviously experience this stuff too. But I'm curious about...
Because men don't deal with mental health issues.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, right? We'll
stigma.
Shut up. We're just going to watch a YouTube video and talk about sports. But how much of this do you think is like a consequence of modernity, not just with, because we're going to get onto the environmental stuff and the food and all of that stuff, but just like a mismatch between like the feminine archetypes in the modern world, the high stress, go, type A, do, boss bitch era. Like, how do you balance all of that and still feel that safety internally?
I mean, no doubt. I think that, I mean, that's a whole other, I know you've had great conversations on here about, you know, birth control and feminism and what's been packaged and sold to us in the world that like, well, you should still have the babies and work, get your social security number going into the system and start gaining wages. And you should do it all while looking beautiful and cooking meals and keeping a clean house. And so, I mean, I think demands across the board are just too broad. And when we extend ourselves, we lose softness. We go into a more masculine mentality. We get a lot more linear, a lot less curved, a lot less feminine. And that's kind of what I'm referencing with my hand. And so it takes a lot of effort. I think this era of women are having to learn to tap into not just generational trauma, but the trauma that's come in these last 3-4 decades of trying to manage and do it all. And that shame that comes behind the weight of having to mother and work and create prioritization within the two. And I what's interesting actually is I'm a huge, you know, metabolic proponent and I wear CGMs often. And when I have seen the worst glucose values, it's always induced by my daughter, and she's lovely. It's not that she's like some, you know, hell-raising jerk. She's amazing. She's the light of my life. And it's so interesting because my glucose levels will hang 70s to 110 always, right? Big proponent of metabolic flexibility, generally live in a light stage of nutritional ketosis, et cetera. But my blood sugar was skyrocketing into 144, 158, somewhere in that range. And it was at 3:30 when she arrived home from school, because as a full-time functional medicine practitioner, that is the time that I'm trying to close out my patient charts.
Right.
I'm managing all of the clinical interventions of what I've prescribed from patient 1 to patient 5 or 6 of the day, behind on all of the pieces. I have executive functional stuff in the world of my supplement line, et cetera. And then I think, oh my God, my beautiful daughter's gonna come home with that smile and see through my glass windows of my office and look to me to tell me about her day. And I don't have the capacity to take any more data in until I can actually release my work brain. And so it was really interesting to see that. And it took seeing it on a CGM for a nerd like me to make some serious change. And so I actually shifted my schedule. I shifted my clinic. So 2 of the 5 days I'm available for her and I actually pick her up from school. It helps me to compartmentalize. And that's what we have to do. We have to compartmentalize. We have to make peace with the present, because none of us can do it perfectly. We always are taking a compromise. But we have to make peace with the present, and that's so important. I share that with all my clients. Even if you have incongruency with your current job, let's say you're working for a company that doesn't have the same ethos, you have a vision to make a change, but you can't hate your job through the process because you're going to have a miserable state of life. It's going to mess with your HPA axis, and that negative self-talk drives nocebo, and a nocebo drives chronic illness. And so it's just so wild that it was literally, I believe, the incongruency of me feeling like shame, guilt, I'm a bad mother, I'm not present for my daughter, blood sugar spike. Wild,
so interesting. I think it is really cool as well that you had the data to back up, something that otherwise might just slip through awareness, because we're just, like you said, you're lost in the sauce. You just go. But if you can see something, you're like, oh, and then you can reverse engineer, like, oh, this is exactly what's going on. You have to then, you have the awareness to actually do something about it, because otherwise you're on a fast track for burnout, right? You're just going to collapse, because nobody can really keep up with this unrealistic pace. It's just not realistic. And I think, then you add on a little bit of guilt and perfectionism and shame, and you're just, you're on a fast track for burnout for sure. So,
yes. And that's something that I work as a mantra with a majority of my patients, is just the simple word safe. Wild, right? Humans on a just primal survival level, meditating on the word safe, telling your body I am safe, is completely liberating, and it can really help your nervous system to recalibrate at times of those zings, of those electric surges. So, we can pivot, we can calendar block, we can make as many changes as we can, but we have to harness the wild stallion of the brain with programmed intentional thought process. And then I supplement the heck out of my lifestyle as well. I mean, I'm L-theanine, I'm working with botanicals, I am taking GABA Calm, which is a neuroinhibitory, and I'll level and pack those up at the times when I see the highest stress hit on my body.
How'd you get into all this?
So I have been passionate about food as medicine and the idea of food first and foremost with being a locavore. So I was very moved, hippie by nature or by learned environment, I don't know. But when I was 18, started really reading up on Alice Waters and this like locavore movement and what farmers markets are. Meanwhile, I had only been exposed to, I swear, 5 vegetables or 6 vegetables at that stage of my life. Very processed diet that I grew up on. And when I went to college, started working, volunteering at the co-op and getting integrated with the farmers market community. Took a wrong turn into vegetarianism through that. And when I went to Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington, is when I was actually diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis based on what the vegan at that time diet had done to me, essentially. A lot of, this is like circa 2003, 2004, a lot of vital wheat gluten, which was called seitan at the time. There was a lot of like the Quoron products of like these like corn. I mean, talk about GMO, talk about high glyphosate before glyphosate was even being discussed, truly. And just a lot of gut disrupting compounds that I was consuming. Soy, of course, as far as a goitrogenic compound disrupting the thyroid. And I was a student clinician. Bastyr is a naturopathic college of medicine, so I was there getting my credentials. And I was a student at the same clinic that I was treating patients. And I was like, I was a patient at the same place that I was treating patients as a student clinician. And started getting acupuncture, did a bunch of labs. My ferritin, which is your marker of your iron status in the body, was a 2. It needs to be above 60 to regrow hair.
Wow.
And so it's a marker that I always recommend women to look at if they're dealing with hair loss, thyroid and ferritin, a full thyroid panel and ferritin. And I had anemia via my hemoglobin and hematocrit, so CBC was off, and had super high TPO or thyroid peroxidase value of showing Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And the clinician, the naturopath said, okay, well, here's some vegetarian iron-rich foods. And I said, but I just learned that spinach is in the ferric, not ferrous form. And so, you know, it's not as bioavailable. And I'm sitting here, you know, trying to make peace with this idea of being kind to the animals, but also knowing deep in myself that there are more biologically available sources of these nutrients, and that this clinician was trying to respect my dogma, my doctrine. And that's really within the constructs of how, when I started to shift to become a recovering vegan or omnivore, I came up with this mantra that I use all the time of doctrine creates disconnect. So if we get so dogma in our diet, you know, I let myself go into chronic illness with having extremely cold appendages, significant weight gain, panic attacks that I had to pull over my car with because of that completely dumped ferritin. I had low pulse ox, low oxygenation in my blood, and all for the animal rights, you know. And the second that I started incorporating, I went for raw egg yolks first, then oysters, then steak. And my husband always teases me that he was cooking a steak on a cast iron. He was farming at the time. And I was cramming for a biochem exam. And he says, like a cartoon character, I like hovered into the kitchen and he turned around and half of it was gone. And he's like, I guess you eat steak now. I was like, hell yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how I'm into it.
It's crazy, right? It's not a too dissimilar story to like what we've heard before, you know, and people, again, your heart was in the right place. You were doing what you thought was the right thing with what you knew at the time. And what was that you said? Dogma creates doctrine?
Doctrine creates disconnect.
Disconnect. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking, I've said something similar, that your physiology outweighs your philosophy.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah. And it's a similar idea, right? And it's like, I'm doing this for the animals, and in the process, I'm hurting my animal, my human body.
Yes.
And it's tragic. And it's maybe a blessing as well, because it put you here to now share and hopefully help women not make the same mistakes and learn through experience. And pain is one of our best teachers, unfortunately.
No doubt.
You know, it quickens consciousness quite quick and puts you back on the right path. So that's a really cool backstory. And I'm curious because you said the 6 R's are kind of how you laid out your book. And I'm guessing, you know, a time and a place for all of them, of course. But is there a bigger one? Is there a logical first step for most people, all people? Do you start with one because it's the most important? And what do you think that is?
So in my book, I provide quizzes at the end of each chapter, which helps you to determine within those R's, which is your stronger Achilles heel, right? So like someone that's just evacuated from a hurricane might have to dig deeper into the rebounding their adrenals because they were just running high adrenaline and in a true survival situation. A mama that just had a baby and is postpartum might have to really delve into that restoring your micronutrients because she just created another being and is at a very depleted high demand state. Someone that, like I said, is a general overstressed individual is probably going to want to really rein in that HPA axis. But with all of that being said, I think the easiest place to get results is in the gut. And so I start patients on a probiotic challenge. I would say 99% of the patients that I see, it's a protocol I'll do before I even stool test. And often, you know, I test anything. So we do salivary cortisol, we do Dutch urinary hormone assessment, as well as salivary hormone, neurotransmitters, micronutrients, all of it. But before I do any of those advanced labs, I have them do a probiotic challenge. And so what I do with that is I collect some baseline measurements just of waist circumference from rise to rest. So what's going on fermentation-wise in the belly for 3 to 4 days. And then I start them on a 15 billion CFU, just lacto-bifido blend, no prebiotic, no inulin, no FOS, anything else that's going to disrupt, just 2 specific strains, and I work them up in 15 billion increments, so 15, 30, 45, 60 in 3-day windows. And we look what happens in their body. What happens on an objective measurement of the waist circumference? So does the abdomen flatten as we increase that gut flora? Is there more distension and bloating? And there's an atom bomb that went off in the belly because there's a bacteria party going on and there's a battle. And then we look at stool formation and frequency, of course. We look at mood changes. If there's a skin flare, some individuals will get very itchy as they work up a probiotic challenge, which would be a histamine issue and likely driven by dysbiosis. And so that's a really easy way to just kind of discern on a very affordable price point of where your probiotic status is at. You can look at alimillerrd.com under my protocols, and I walk through it, have a video on it. And I find that to be a huge turnkey leap pad.
What do you think is contributing to the problem with most people's gut health? The war that you've said potentially is going on, the SIBO, the things we hear about. I mean, probably a deep rabbit hole, but what do you think is going on?
I mean, there's a multifactorial driver towards sterility, right? So a lot of people don't know that stress alone sterilizes the microbiome. So there are many studies that have proven that in both animals and humans. They've done electric shock tests on animals, unfortunately, but we do see that lacto just plummets to zero, to no growth. And we see that even without electric shock, the stressor of removing a mama from its the baby to mama, and the baby having to see that mama but not access lacto, plummets. So all of us, as we said, full circle, are high stress. That in itself, our microbiome is just constantly being depleted because we're not in that robust, balanced state. Secondary, not enough people spend enough time outside or in the soil. So we're missing out that whole array of soil-based organisms, which have natural antidepressant, amazing effects. Soil-based organisms also have the way of chelating toxins. So you can't, I mean, I'm always saying humic acid and fulvic acid, A, on a supplement level to consider, but B, start gardening. It's one of the best ways to support a robust microbiome and get good, healthy chelation without over-chelating minerals. So that's huge. There's just, and when we're spending more time inside, there are so many now, especially post-bad season. I won't use the C word because there's too many billions of dollars that marketed that single virus like bananas. But during the bad season in 2020, we saw a huge influx of disinfectants and antimicrobial products, right? And so the work environment in any public space, you're going to see, like at the airport, your trays were treated with microban. And that even started preceding in the 90s in kids' toys. That microban started to come, which is, you know, microplastic treated antibacterials. I mean, it's madness. Just right. So I mean, I think there's so many factors, and then glyphosate itself actually is a broad spectrum antibiotic. And so, you know, we talk about it as a neurotoxin. There's so much we can go down the rabbit hole there, but it's present in so many foods today that on a dietary level, we're also being exposed to the antibiotic influence.
So knowing all that you know, and we're coming back to the environmental stuff, because I'm very interested about our water and food and sprays and such, but I really want to dial in on the diet for a minute, because you know a lot about obviously trying to regenerate health and repopulate the gut. And you choose to use, like you said, I think a low-grade ketogenic approach for a lot of people. Explain to me your thought process around that. Why is this version of ketogenic dieting your method of choice?
Humans were designed to be a hybrid machine using ketones and glucose, period. That's how humans were designed. We would not have made it. We would not have made it more than 2 days as hunter and gatherers with scarcity without the ability to make ketones. Babies in utero are producing ketones. God made us as humans to use ketones and glucose. The standard American diet robbed us of access to using ketones as fuel. Yeah. So it's not a abstract dietary approach. It's getting the body into its primal state of, we can say metabolic flexibility. We can say working as a hybrid, right? But I do believe that for optimal function, we need at least trace or moderate amount of ketones in the bloodstream, visiting at least frequency of a couple times a month, right? So the way that I approach ketogenic, I always jump in with a keto reset, because you have to kind of like level it up and lock it in to support that insulin sensitivity. We get 400% improvement in insulin sensitivity when we're making ketones. I mean, and so many people are insulin resistant. So when you lock and load for even a 6-week jump in, which is what I use in my program and also the live programs that I run, that's enough to start to then make the ketones. Ketones cross the blood-brain barrier. So in the world of anti-anxiety, I mean, this is why keto can be used for epilepsy, right? And seizures. It actually can prevent those grand mal seizures because they cross the blood-brain barrier and play a role in our central nervous system. Ketones are GABAergic, and so they upregulate this neuroinhibitory, feel-good neurocompound GABA. And GABA helps us to feel safe. GABA helps us to have cognitive awareness and acuity. We can be, quote unquote, in the zone when GABA levels are elevated. It's not sedative, but it is anxiolytic. So it doesn't allow us to go into that survival mentality. Some would say grounding, or, oh, my mood was very stabilized once I started to make ketones via that mechanism, I believe. They're also a lower oxidizing fuel. So it's a cleaner fuel source for your body to burn ketones versus glucose. You put out less pollution essentially in the body, less oxidative stress when we use ketones versus glucose. And via that, it's anti-inflammatory and antioxidant repleting or maintaining. You deplete less antioxidants when you have a cleaner burning fuel. I mean, that could go on. There's so many mechanisms. There's mechanisms on our HPA axis in the world that ketones can actually help with our LH and FSH balance in women. So for women that are dealing with issues with their cycle or are dealing with PCOS, of course, you get the insulin sensitivity and hormetic response. I mean, it's I think, a beautiful tool that, again, we unfortunately have robbed access to. I think keto can go wrong if we get dogma and doctrine and we're afraid about the amount of carbs in our celery. Or I remember when I started, I would take a bite of an apple for my daughter and I would spit the apple piece out. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't make no sense.
Right.
Right. And so I think anything has a line. And that's where I love using CGMs. And once you do this tight reset, you figure out how many grams of carbs can I eat so that I can get biodiversity of phytocompounds so that I can still maintain a light stage of ketosis and use ketones and glucose as fuel without kicking myself out and then taking 72 hours to get back in. And people are shocked when I'm eating peaches from Fredericksburg. You know, I just had burrata, peaches, olive oil, and basil as a little light snack before coming over here. And I'm fat adapted. You know, that's possible. There's not a yes or no keto list. And unfortunately, when you look online, you're going to see no this, no that. And I love, I had like this meme back in the day, I think it was in 2020, with the Batman Robin slap, right? And it's like, but that's not keto. And it's like, you idiot, ketosis is a metabolic state, not a yes or no food list. So, I mean, I have muffins in here with a banana, God forbid. One banana in 12 muffins, and a 1/12 of a banana is 2 grams of carbs. So if you're scared of that banana in my recipe, you got problems other places. Yeah,
it's so on point. I remember when the keto craze really took off, if you will, and there was just like these numbers being pulled out, and it was so black and white. It was basically over 25 grams of carbohydrates, you're out of ketosis. And it's just like, wait. Now I've seen studies. These were trained athletes, but they were, I think, the number was high. It was maybe 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates per day, and they could still get back into ketosis by the end of the day because A, they were active and they were metabolically flexible. Yes. So yeah, it's not like this binary magical number where it turns off. It's kind of like this state of flux and energy. Do you do anything to spur that on? Are you a proponent of fasting? I know sometimes we get into the arenas where these things can be pushed against because they can damage metabolism. Keto long-term suppresses the thyroid, damages the metabolism. Fasting is no good for women. How do you stand against all of that?
So I would argue that chronic calorie restriction damages the thyroid. Making ketones does not damage the thyroid. Those are two, and that's the problem, right? A lot of things get mucky in the data when we look at things in a pocket of keto is bulletproof coffee with intermittent fasting and eating 2 meals and still doing your high intensity exercise and getting shit sleep. It's like, you're going to have some thyroid dysfunction if that's your MO. The thyroid also, the argument with the thyroid is, well, the thyroid demands glucose. Again, when you're making ketones, your glucose doesn't zero out. That's a complete misnomer, misunderstanding of human metabolism. Your glucose levels stabilize. They get off that blood sugar roller coaster. They're not going to dip under low 70s or 65 for many. And so you still have enough glucose for the tissues of need. I think that when we talk about fasting and any form of caloric restriction, I like to lean into an assessment value of leptin. So leptin is a hormone in the Greek language. Leptos translates to hunger and thin. And so I think actually thin is what it translates to. And it is a satiety-based hormone. And so ghrelin being its oppositional hormone, ghrelin is the driver of appetite, and leptin is that satiety, safety. So also what we see with leptin is that it also crosses blood-brain barrier, docks to hypothalamus, plays a role on the HPA axis. If leptin is too low, HPA axis dysregulation occurs. And leptin is made by fat, either consumption of fat absorbed through the intestines or the mobilization of your fat as fuel in the world of keto if you had enough reserves. So someone maybe of my type of close to, I don't want to say ideal, but a healthy weight individual, ideal body type, they would not ideally fast because they don't have that reserve to help to liberate that leptin. And what will happen for that individual if they're over caffeinating and under eating, even if they're eating quality foods, not getting enough total calories, not getting enough protein, not getting enough frequency, is that the body no longer feels safe and that leptin level will decline, and then we'll see dysfunction. Someone with 30 to 50 pounds of weight to lose on their belly and has that deep freezer, still, even if a woman may do well fasting if their leptin levels are high. So if they have leptin resistance is when I allow them to fast. If they have optimal leptin, I have them eating within an hour of rise, 30 grams of protein. If they have low leptin, I have them doing a metabolic refeed plan to help to get their body to feel safe. So it is so N equals 1. But the commonality is I'm still trying to keep it low glycemic and keep the individual into that metabolic flexibility, and only starting with whole, real foods, so food made by God, not man. Yeah.
What does that look like from a building a plate kind of perspective? I love that you mentioned 30 grams of protein within an hour of waking up. When you're thinking about leaning into what else you put on your plate, are you thinking like easy to digest, low toxicity, local organic fruits and vegetables and broths and soups, and like what's kind of build a plate for me a little bit?
Yeah, like a day of eating for me or someone on what end of the spectrum? Because it's so varied.
I know, it's very varied. Take me through your day of eating.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for me, I am in the mind space of, and generally I like to get outside also. I'm a huge proponent of leptin connection to circadian rhythm. And there's so many reasons of why we need to witness sunrise and sunset. And so I'm a big proponent of lemon and salt in my water. We were talking offline. I have a 40,000 gallon rain barrel collection system in my house. So we run my house, all of the water systems, even the toilets, unfortunately, are flushing rainwater. We have a closed septic system, so we spray our own septic in our yard. I mean, nothing's from municipal. And then we have a well down the road on my acreage. And so I start my day with my water, my salt, and lemon, and then I go do my chicken care and kind of do some stuff outside, back up, and I do a quick to assimilate protein. So this is either going to be a full cup of cottage cheese with olive oil and flaky salt. That's the easiest go-to. It could be, if I have a little bit more time, like a pastured pork sausage patty with 3 eggs and some veggies. That's more of like a weekend thing, truly, to have the time to cook. It might even be a green smoothie where I'm using grass-fed whey, and I'm going to use either raw milk in that or full-fat coconut milk. I'm going to add some herbs in there. Like I love to add ginger and turmeric root into there, and a little bit of a stone fruit. So peach right now would be the one in season. And then from there, I'm going to do something at lunch often, like a protein and some moderate amount of veg. If I'm working, I want real dense lunch because my digestive enzymes are suppressed when I'm stressed. So we only make a quarter of the amount of our digestive enzymes when we're in a sympathetic fight or flight mode. And unfortunately, as much as I like layer things in, I know when I'm working in clinic, I'm higher stress. So that's usually where I'll lean into like a green smoothie or skipjack tuna salad, or if I'm doing like a beef taco bowl, something like that. But I'm not going to go for like a steak, a pork chop, something that is denser in its meat fibers, because I know I have suppressed HCl and digestive enzymes, and I honestly don't have more than sometimes 7 times to move that fork to my mouth. So I need density. That's also maybe where a green smoothie would move instead of that morning time. And then evening, I'm a huge red meat proponent. We eat red meat 5 of the 7 nights of the week. So that's where then like the steak, the chuck, if I'm doing carnitas in a slow cooker, that kind of thing. And it's usually like roasted cauliflower or a sheet pan of veg. That's kind of it.
Cool. Cooking in good quality olive oil, tallow, avocado oil, that kind of stuff?
We use tallow. We render our own lard.
Nice,
And so from pasture-raised pork fat, and then grass-fed tallow. I use olive oil, absolutely. I'm really trying to wean out the avocado oil. I just think that it's highest processed of all of them, of course. Yeah. You can't make a clear oil out of avocado. I'm like, nope, not feeling that. And so, of course, at times I'll use like a chosen foods avocado oil, but I really try to use that in the peripheral, not as a primary.
Absolutely, yeah, cool. I'm going to segue a little bit here because we've been talking about like ghrelin and leptin and hormone hunger signaling and balancing, and it just kind of came to me, and it's so prevalent now. I'm thinking about it a lot, as I think a lot of the media is talking about Ozempic and this, these are GLP-1 agonist drugs, so they manipulate hunger in a pretty profound way. As a dietitian and somebody that is trying to really help people heal, do you think this is helpful? Is it harmful? Is it a yes, no, it depends, maybe kind of thing? Is it frustrating for you?
Oh, we could go on a whole hour about Ozempic and semaglutide drugs. I just did a podcast on my show last week called The Will to Eat, The Will to Live. And the whole concept of this episode, I've done many on Ozempic specifically, but the whole concept of this episode, which I'm most recently passionate about, is the idea that when we are weekly injecting ourselves with a weight loss drug that not only suppresses appetite cyclically, like GLP-1 is a natural peptide, but it doesn't stay suppressed in the human body. It is a cyclical peptide that responds to substance, to food, is how the body was designed to work. So when we take this exogenously outside from the body and we inject it into ourselves, and it chronically maintains the GLP-1 levels to be elevated, that can create some serious issues of nausea, of digestive discomfort. I have friends that are anesthesiologists that the entire anesthesiology practicum has changed as a guideline because of the amount of people on GLP-1 drugs. Because guess what? When they're putting people under for surgery, they still have food particles that they're worried about aspirating. And they've been NPO for 24. Right? Yeah, they're still NPO, meaning nothing per oral. So they're not eating for 24 hours following their surgical guidelines, right? But that's not enough anymore with GLP-1s. I mean, so the slow gastric emptying and that chronic nausea talk about setting up for SIBO and gastric dysfunction. And what's just wild about it to me, I mean, we could go into all the side effects, et cetera, the loss of muscle, which ultimately hinders metabolism, the fact that everyone gets malnourished on it.
Ozempic face.
They're not eating enough protein. I mean, but what's wild to me about it is I have witnessed people in public talking, when I'm dining out, I'm like sometimes perusing, and this husband and wife were at the table for like an hour and a half. I was doing a work meeting, and the husband cheers her on. He goes, "Hey, honey, last week you were only able to get in 4 French fries. I see you ate half of them." It's like, Good job. You ate, you forced through that suppression and you pushed through to eat those French fries. And then guess what's going to happen in a month from then when she tells her doctor that her weight loss stalled? He's going to increase the milligrams of the medication. And then she's going to struggle with hating food again and then work her way into those same bad habits and increase the medication again. And that's how that goes, right?
Yeah.
Insane.
It's crazy, yeah, as you was mentioning, because I was just doing a bit of research myself recently, and I think, you know, the effect of native naturally produced GLP can literally be minutes in the body, and the injectable semaglutides is the half-life's about a week. Yeah. It's crazy. From one injection, the effects of long-lasting, it's like 90-something hours, so it's just completely unnatural. And the slowdown of the gastric emptying is really interesting, especially as you mentioned the gut health stuff. You're essentially putrefying food.
Yes.
And it's now taking twice as long, 3 times as long to move through. And I know you think a lot about lymph and elimination, and those things are really, really important. And I just worry that we could potentially solve the issue of somebody wanting to lose a lot of weight and achieving it that way. But what is the damage that we cause in the process? Like trashing hormones, trashing the thyroid, the intense loss of muscle mass.
And nutrients, bar none,
yeah.
Micronutrient and macronutrient level. I mean, and caloric level. I mean, it's just, you're mimicking starvation.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, right? It's so interesting. Like if we force a solution on a problem like the obesity epidemic, and we don't consider all the factors at play, we're just going to create new problems. And I think this might solve the obesity epidemic, maybe, but it's just going to cause a whole host of other problems. And now we're just going to have malnourished, weak, osteopenic, sarcopenic, and now then we're going to have another drug to combat that.
Right.
All because we're looking for an artificial solution to an artificial problem. We wouldn't even, if we just ate the way nature intended, we wouldn't even have this problem. And it's so crazy because I get it. That's not the world we live in and all of that stuff, but man, it's upside down.
Right. If you literally just eat God food and you literally make your own food, or at least shop at your farmer's market, buy from your ranchers and growers, shake the hand that produces the food, and have connection, again, relationship with your food. You don't even have to honestly worry about macros.
No, you don't.
Because I think that everyone, like you don't even need me. Literally, like, because you will just find that native state of that light ketosis, because it's damn near impossible to consume that many carbs because it's a lot of work. Yeah. Like making your own sourdough is a romantic process, right? And that romantic process allows time, intention, purposefulness. It's not a secondary thought or a numbing or something that you can overconsume. It's a lot more self-limiting based on the process itself. And I think that's why things are the way they are, right? Yeah. You know, Michael Pollan talked about how, you know, if everyone made their own French fries from scratch and had to purchase a deep fryer, they would eat a heck of a lot less French fries because it's messy. Yeah. It's a process.
100%. It's so true. It's so true. We focused a lot on food so far, and I want to kind of now get back into these environmental toxins, because I know you've been deep diving this recently. So things like, you know, we hear it all the time: forever chemicals, PFAs, glyphosates everywhere. Where do we even begin with a topic like this? What are the biggest offenders in your estimation?
The three that I kind of break out as a focus that I've been really nerding out on this year are glyphosate, microplastics, and EMF. So they all have their own mechanism of action, and unfortunately they're all ubiquitous, meaning they're found everywhere. And even if you are eating a strict carnivore purist diet, you are being exposed to them daily, I would argue. I mean, again, Andes Mountains, still PFAs. So, you know, there is strategy, I believe, that we need to employ to educate individuals on where all three are found, or our exposure, and how we can limit to them. And I'll let you pick one and we can nerd out on one of them. So we need to limit our exposure or reduce our exposure, modify our environment as best as possible. But we also not only need defense, we need offense. And in the world of offense, depending on what it is, if it's EMF, for instance, EMF hijacks our electric frequency. We are electrical beings, right? And so EMF is hijacking the electric charge that you and I put out. Like, we're right now sharing an energy field here because we know through EKGs that we have a 6-foot extension of our electric field as humans, right? And so super creepy thinking back to the bad season recommendations of staying 6 feet separated, right? Don't combine energy fields because we want to control your energy field with these apps, with these devices. We want to hijack that system of your HPA axis and put you on fear mode because that's where we can control you. And so, you know, when we look at how to offset EMF, EMF, it's, yeah, shut down, do your Wi-Fi kill switch in the bedroom, which I do. Don't use Wi-Fi or your Bluetooth in your car. That's the worst place. And so many people.
Metal tin
It
that you're
is,
driving around.
and the signals your drive, every cell tower
Yeah.
is getting you from multitude, and it's banging off of the car. So that's a huge hygiene thing to change.
Good old USB.
Yes, yes. Get back to the burned CD. Give me a burned mixtape.
Yeah.
But so there's all this defense, but then the offense in that world, and then we know that EMF, for instance, can drive oxidative stress. So my argument is, well, we need to create more connection with nature and God frequency. So, we're looking at like Schumann resonance. Schumann resonance is highly influxed during lightning storms. 7.83 hertz is a theta wave in the brain. This has also been called God frequency. This is what we feel when we're grounding the earth. This is what we feel when we put our feet in the river. This is connection, right? And so as much as there's signals of disconnect or artificial signals, we have to go back and proactively seek out the electromagnetic field of connection. We have to hug longer. We have to get oxytocin boost from our pets, from touching other humans. Interesting connection to the CGM. I had a patient who is an astrophysicist, super nerd, who was having a really hard time during the bad season. His CGM was the most balanced when he was ballroom dancing because he was an isolated human who was not dating in his 50s, and that was the only time he touched a human during that time. And guess what? Human connection heals. Go figure.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think in all of those worlds, we need to look at both reduction of exposure, but we also have to look at what do we proactively layer in to offset and support.
Yeah, that's cool. And the EMF one is really cool. I think you laid out some really good strategies there. When we think about things like microplastics, there's going to be more of the obvious low-hanging fruit, like, hey, don't use plastic water bottles and don't, put plastic things in the dishwasher. And but we've obviously taken some on, right? And I think glyphosate is probably the same thing too. So when we get on the front foot and we're taking action about limiting these things, but now how much... Is it possible to detox these things? Like,
yes.
Can we get rid of microplastics?
Yes.
Can we get rid of glyphosate? And if so, how do we do it?
Get rid of, not sure, like because 100% they have done, unfortunately, what am I trying to think of the word of when people are dead, when they look at their bodies. Autopsies, thank you. They have done autopsies on individuals, and 100% of the organ samples that were assessed had microplastics in them. We've seen, of course, a 4.5 time increase of heart disease risk because of the microplastics. I think 80% of arterial tissue was found to have microplastics in an assessment that was done on living individuals.
Yeah.
And so they are finding their ways not only into our fat stores, but into our organs. There is actually research that has come out in the last couple of years, 2023, great paper on, I believe it was 2023, great paper on probiotics to actually offset microplastic exposure and help to detox microplastics. There was also a polyphenol study done on various polyphenols and the various categories of microplastics and how these inhibit them and also directly offset the mechanism of action. So if it upregulates oxidative stress in the liver, this is a polyphenol that's going to support hepatocyte function and is also going to give that antioxidant to offset that oxidative stress. And so I think that we're seeing a lot more to come. One of my favorites in both glyphosate and microplastics would be humic acid. So taking fulvic acid as like a mineral supplement is fantastic. And also chlorella and spirulina. Chlorella and spirulina, there was a study that was done on mussels in the environment based on glyphosate toxicity. Was taking out because it was an agricultural community and the runoff water was killing the mussels, right? And so they actually saw that with supplementing the water with spirulina and chlorella, that the mussels were able to detoxify. And so really powerful stuff. And so I'm using a lot of E3 Live these days. It's just from a lake in Oregon, a spirulina chlorella blend, adding that into water with lemon, using that into smoothies, adding that to bone broth. And I find that to be a really big piece of helping to offset and chelate. I'm not a big fan of chelators like charcoal or of binders that we see like DMSAs, unless we're in an active purge time, but not as a chronic use, because those can really chelate also our trace minerals and throw off our electrolytes. But what's lovely about spirulina and chlorella is it's nutritional, it's antioxidant rich, it chelates and binds, but it doesn't drive that deficiency.
Yeah, that's something I became aware of recently, because I've used charcoal in certain instances to heal from injury in terms of like gut stuff, but yeah, long-term chronic use can also pull out the good stuff too. And I think it's finding these perfect little cocktails of compounds that support you without robbing you of the good stuff. Similarly, you mentioned antibiotics. You know, at certain times in our life, we're probably very thankful that we do have them, but they don't just non-discriminatorily kill the bad stuff. You know, they're going to also wipe out the good stuff. So it's always a dose makes the poison. Be very careful with that stuff. And as we start thinking about binders and gut stuff, I've been endlessly fascinated by this resurgence in awareness about potential parasites. And I think about my life, and I'd almost forgot this completely happened. But in 2013, I was a backpacker for a while, and I was in Thailand, and I think I ate some old meat or something. And in the preceding days, I got sick, and I got sicker and sicker and sicker until the point where I basically had jaundice. The whites of my eyes were turning yellow, and I was like, something is really wrong. And I went to see a doctor. And he immediately looked at me and he was like, oh, you've got a parasite and it's in your liver. And he gave me a cocktail of medication and a big injection in the butt. And I still to this day have no idea what it was. And within a couple of days, I was fine. And I wonder about the lingering effects of all of that stuff. And now I live on a homestead, and there's chickens and there's poop and there's goats and there's worms, and we're actively deworming the goats and things like that all the time. And I'm like, is this something we should be thinking about too? So where's your thought process on parasites? What's that rabbit hole?
So there's natural dewormers too, right? You know, and it's so interesting because my dog's out on the 15 acres that we live on. And, you know, he's naturally, I believe, deworming himself on a daily basis. Yeah. He knows what natural foods to eat out in our landscape that is going to help his gut. Carrots are a dewormer. Apples are a dewormer. And so there are different compounds naturally occurring that can do that work. And, you know, circling back on the antibiotic thing, there is a gamut of antimicrobial compounds. I use my nanosilver, which is colloidal silver. We use berberine. We use oil of oregano. You have to exhaust the natural medicine cabinet first, unfortunately, because you know, a single dose, a single prescription run of a 7-day run of antibiotics can have such a severe impact on depression and anxiety and mental health, unfortunately, and thyroid dysfunction we're seeing in women. So I always say exhaust the natural first. In the world of parasite, and I do a lot of GI map testing, I love stool testing, just currently had treated myself for H. pylori infection that I got back a negative test after 2-week protocol, had occult blood as well. And so that was treated. And, you know, I lean into things like immunoglobulins. So some might use, I use a product in my line called GI Immune Builder, which is serum bovine immunoglobulins often.
Are we finding colostrum? Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and secondary would be colostrum, a dairy form, right? And so dairy-free serum or use colostrum, but getting immunoglobulins is, I think, one of the best ways to prime our system on an offense and defense, because immunoglobulins help a robust microbiome and they help the immunosurveillance to downregulate any heightened food sensitivity. So we make antigen, when we make antibody to antigen exposure, we have better capacity to make antibodies, right? So whether it is an antigen from a pathogen, like this could be a viral pathogen, or this could be parasite, or this could be mold even exposure, we need those immunoglobulins in a robust level to help to create that defense mechanism, to help to eradicate overgrowth of imbalance. And so I see that as a huge strategy just for like a daily tool. And I would even lean into that more than a daily probiotic for many people, especially once you know your gut biome is on track and then you're using probiotic rich foods and ferments and such. So that's huge. And then it just depends on what we're seeing. I have a whole parasite protocol. There are natural botanicals with great success that can be utilized, but should be pulsed, should not be taken chronically. The gut is so resilient, that the tissue of our gut is 3 to 5 days changing. It's a new gut every 3 to 5 days, your epithelial lining, right? And so, I think, again, not stressing in the mess, knowing that we have co-evolved with parasite for years, and just looking at the overall balance, I think, is the most important. I limit a cleanse to 6 weeks of using aggressive antifungal, antimicrobial, antiparasitic herbs and compounds.
Yeah, very cool. I think that you know, hopefully getting people to a place where they're so, like you said, we've been co-evolving with parasites for a long time, and it's not necessarily, you don't want to get rid of all parasites. It would be impossible anyway.
Yeah.
It's the kind of host thing again, right?
Yes.
It's terrain theory versus
Yes.
germ theory kind of thing. You know, how balanced are you? And if you are healthily balanced and these other markers and all that stuff are working well, then you probably shouldn't get overrun unless you get exposed to an acute, you know, bout or something like that. So, what would be signs and symptoms that somebody should be looking for positively to know that they are detoxing well, lymph is open? Like, I've heard a lot of people talking about, you know, bowel movements, regular, ability to sweat. I know you're a big proponent of rebounding and moving the lymph. What are some of the things that you focus on there?
In the world of lymphatic health?
Yeah, and drainage and elimination.
Yes. So, you know, we have different mechanisms or phases of detoxification, biochemically speaking. And first, what we're doing is the process of phase 1, which is hydroxylation and activation, making fat-soluble toxins water-soluble. Secondary phase is where we bring in all the sulfur-containing compounds. So this is where we lean into things like N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, et cetera. As long as we're getting that diversity in the diet or supplementing, if we have shown markers of toxicity, we always would have to supplement to get back to normal. And so if we have, for instance, elevated liver enzymes, if we have dark circles under the eyes, if we have known micronutrient deficiencies, if we have pitting or fluid swelling, edema, if we have tenderness on our lymph nodes, these are all reasons to support that phase 2 sulfur-containing pathway. Of course, liver and meats are very high in sulfur-containing amino acids, and that's always the joke of like, you can't juice cleanse your way through a detox. You need sulfur-containing amino acids. Yes, we see some of these in things like cabbage and broccoli and sprouts, but we get the most density in our animal products. And so you still need to incorporate meats, no doubt. And then the third phase is the elimination. So the first 2 phases are biochemically occurring within the cells. And then the elimination is either happening through sweat, through urination, or through stool. And so we look to upregulate all of those ways. So optimal hydration. I am a huge fan of tea, you know, for listeners that don't tolerate vegetables or want to keep lighter on their intake of fruits and vegetables. I think tea is a great way to get polyphenols if your gut doesn't tolerate. Because you can get such great antioxidant and also detox support. Tea is also a diuretic, so it's going to support that urination pathway, remove that excess fluid. Stool, I like to see at minimum 1.5 cups of stool as a bowel evacuation daily, whether that's 1 or 2 movements, at least 1 movement a day, well-formed, easy to pass. Go through that whole Bristol chart with my patients and look at optimal formation. And then in the world of sweat, absolutely. I have a sunlight and sauna. Awesome. Haven't been using it this summer because I have the sun. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge piece of the puzzle. And microplastics specifically, we see research of the best detoxification through sweat. So that's really important. But what I will yell out to listeners is don't sweat in a sauna in microplastic yoga shorts. Because everyone freaking does it, right? It's like you have to worry about what are you wearing when you're in your sauna. Like only wear organic whitey tighties, y'all, or do it naked. Because that you're actually transdermally pulling in from what you're wearing throughout the process as you're excreting. And I mean, that's like one of my favorite things, like you said, beyond the plastic water bottles and whatever. It's like, get the yoga pants off of your hoo-ha with the microplastics. That's not going to be good for your sexual function.
For sure. Yeah. we had the gentleman on from NADS. They make an organic cotton underwear for men. And I'm wearing cotton and I'm free balling these days. It's something, again, that it's another one of these things. You're like, man, I never thought about it. You know, tight, constrictive clothing. How many women listening right now are wearing yoga pants because they're like, but they look good and they're super convenient. It's like, yeah, but there's a cost to this stuff. And maybe you got to be in your cotton linen girl era or something like that. Get some hemp going.
And when it doesn't have to be, again, 100%, it's a conscious, cognizant effort, right? So like Christy Dawn, I just bought some of her regenerative cotton dresses. And it's like, so when you're making new and ongoing investments, you don't have to eliminate your entire closet, but start to make mindful shifts to reduce the exposure and feel empowered by them, not victimized. Because I think that all too often we can get in that analysis paralysis or information overload and just feel like we're doomed.
And then you get the classic unhealthy obsession with health kind of thing, the orthorexia, I can't even go out and be with my friends because, my God, they might use seed oils at this restaurant. And actually, you know, seed oils are crappy, but the stress that you're inducing is probably worse than the little exposure to seed oils if you've got all the other things right, you know?
And
so,
the healing mechanisms of community and connection.
People.
No doubt.
Yeah, it's so good. That brings me to another question. Like we've spoken so much on food, and there's been a lot of lifestyle stuff in too, but what's some of the most impactful non-food related health advice you give to people?
Ooh, so non-food related would be connected to sun exposure. And I mean, I'm just starting to nerd out. So I read the book Body Electric by Robert Obecker, which really led me to a big part of my lecturing position on EMFs and the whole Schumann frequency and XYZ. But I'm also really nerding out right now on photon therapy and sun exposure and the idea that, you know, like food is just a barcode from the sun. I think that's Dr. Krauss that says that, Krauss says that. And so, you know, it's like getting our bodies out in the sunlight, I think for at minimum 2 hours a day is a strong recommendation that I make for all of my patients. And you have to sometimes, to create new ritual, you have to create external sometimes demands to do so. So like that's what's helpful for us of having animals to take care of. Yeah. It's like you have to go outside. Do it. Right. And so, you know, it creates that environment to set yourself up for success, to keep you connected in the process, to touch the soil, to interplay with the feces of the animals, all of it, because it's part of the daily tasks or chores that we've given ourselves by choice. And so when we create ritual or routine, that really helps us to establish new patterns and just finding within our day-to-day focus. So sunlight, 2 hours a day, best to get that red light therapy from sun rise and sunset. Yeah. That's where we're gonna get the most infrared benefits of the sun. Free, right? And then another one is harnessing the wild stallion of your brain. So like I said earlier, that nocebo. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of the placebo effect and how if you believe you're getting a medication, you might heal, right? But the nocebo effect is that if you believe, on the other hand, they've done research where they've given people chemotherapy, but it was just a saline drip, and people lost their hair. People retched, they literally vomited. Yeah,
they created the symptoms.
Yes, they thought they received chemotherapy and their body responded in such a way. And so that extends to that, you know, cassette reel that's been recording from day one of your life of taking in other people's perceptions of you, words, thoughts, your own self-talk. And again, getting back to that idea of safety or survival, the internal script has to at least be at a state of being at peace with the present. And so surrender is huge. I rely a lot on my faith and the Lord to help to feel at peace and to release what is not mine to hold. And so I find that to be very helpful. Some people, it might be mantra, it might be prayer, it might be scripture, but actually intentionally seeding some of those new patterns are extremely important for a healing process. And those would be probably the two biggest lifestyle. And then I would say connecting with community and human touch, I think is huge, huge.
Powerful, powerful. What's next for you? I know you're working on some cool stuff. I know you're getting into the kids arena and things like that. Yeah. Books, workshops, speaking. What's lighting you up
All
right
the
now?
things. So I am putting out Naturally Nourished Kids in fall of 2025. So not this fall yet. And that will be co-authored with my business partner, Becky, who is my co-part on the podcast and YouTube channel that I have under Naturally Nourished. So that's a fun project we've been working on, and it's food as medicine for balanced minds and bodies.
Awesome.
And we're taking on things like ADHD and you know, food as medicine through the ages. So savory starts with baby-led weaning all the way through making healthy hip in your teens and tweens. And just super jazzed about that. I think that unfortunately kids get marketed to and more manipulated foods, and parents, unfortunately, even when they're making their own wellness choices, can often put the kids, I don't think intentionally by any means, but on the back burner, or feel like their kid will miss out on an experience if they make them abide by their dietary changes. And so we're really trying to present this abundance, not restrictive perspective of, you know, how we can really nourish the children of America.
Yes.
And I think that is the really important project as far as our future generations and what's going to come in our healthcare.
It's so important. And I think you're right. I think the children are specifically marketed to because then they're a customer for life. If you can get them early, they're a customer for life. And it's, you know, in part, the job of the parent to lead by example. And, you know, like men, we always do, you know, the protectors and providers. And yeah, a lot of that is protect your family from those crappy foods too. And lead by example where possible. But if you can get in and make health hip again, and that you've just kind of altered the trajectory of their life quite profoundly. And kids are the future. You know, that's as cliche as and obvious as it sounds. It really is. And if we look at our current trajectory, I think nobody feels good about where we're heading if we don't change something.
No doubt. And the unfortunate and positive impact of food as medicine is that food is a double-edged sword, right? So you have to eat. And, you know, food can either disrupt your microbiome, food can be pro-inflammatory, food can deplete your body of nutrients, food can create a glycemic spike and insulin resistance. Or on the other hand, food can support a robust microbiome. Food can be anti-inflammatory. Food can be mood enhancing. Food can be nutrient dense and combat toxicity. And so we have to make the choice, and it's both an offense defense, you know, like we've been talking about all day. So I'm super passionate about that, and starting with the youth. And then I'm also on this concept of these three greater evils, and trying to find the intersects of how to combat the glyphosate, microplastics, and EMF. And I think that that's going to be a solo book I'll be putting out soon as well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you get a sense that there is a shift? Do you think people are waking up?
I think that there is, but I think that just like a continuum, you know, we sometimes overshift or over restrict or over jump, right? And so I think we're in a process of a pendulum swing. I saw it happen with keto, and I've rode the waves through it. You know, keto was so hot, and there was KetoCon, and I was keynoting all over. And then it's like people are like, oh, well, but keto's passed because it didn't stay. And it's like, well, because people got dogmatic. I think we see the same thing in a lot of like the regenerative world that we're seeing right now rev up. I'm hopeful that we don't over-label it. We don't commoditize it, or, you know, allow people on big ag levels to use this term. And I think it's all about relation, really.
Yeah. Get in there, have good conversations, connect with the community again. Like, it's a grassroots movement. This whole thing.
Sense. Yeah. I mean, even the world of like, so I'm gluten-free, right? But I can't make peace with the idea. I'm gluten-free because it's easier to avoid gluten, because when you're dealing with gluten in the US, it's a hybridized wheat, which is higher gliadin, more pro-inflammatory than we see in the EU and other areas of the world, right? It's also high glyphosate sprayed, so you're getting a 2-for-1 there. You're getting the neurotoxin, the microbiome sterility, and you're getting the higher pro-inflammatory zonulin gut factor of the gliadin. And the gluten foods in America have dough conditioners. They have seed, you know, so it's all, right? It's not just the grain. It's not the wheat growing, that general wheat, einkorn wheat that has been consumed from biblical times, right? So I think we get myopic again. And so it's like, I know that when I'm evolving with my sourdough journey, I'm currently making a gluten-free sourdough, and I told my husband, I was like, this is gonna make people feel like I'm going crazy, but like we're gonna play with some Barton Mills Springs. Like, we're gonna play with some non-enriched, because that's also the issue with gluten, especially with children and mental health. Fortified flours have folic acid. And so for anyone MTHFR, myself included, my daughter, of course, included, you know, when you get that synthetic folic acid, that can really disrupt your methylation processes. So again, easier to maybe avoid. But in your own home, with relationship, with knowing the grower, with knowing that it's organic, it's heirloom, it's one single ingredient, it's not synthetically enriched, that's a different food. Oh, yeah. That's a different ingredient. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to do a bunch of gut tests and gut zoomer stuff, looking at zonulin and such, and see what my body does. And like, I'm going to N equals 1 this, because I've now been gluten-free for over 8 years. And it'll just be interesting to see. Yeah, it will. Where can people go to follow you as you're a mad scientisting your way through life and existence and helping other people too? Where can they keep up? So everything is at alimillerrd.com. That is my website, and that has my functional medicine protocols, access to my clinic to become a patient. I work only virtually. So if you want to order labs with me or work with me as a functional medicine client. I have my Naturally Nourished supplement line there as well, and the Naturally Nourished podcast, Naturally Nourished YouTube, and then at Ali Miller RD on social media. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us today. It was very fun. Yeah, my pleasure. All right, there you have it, my friends. Go follow Ali. We'll see you next time. Stay radical. Peace out.
All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.